New Year's Eve, 1994. Russian tanks surge into Grozny. By dawn, 225 armored vehicles are destroyed, 10% of the invasion force reduced to burning wreckage in 1 month. 5 years later, the same city, the same mistake, and Russian crews pay with their lives again. Why did command let history repeat itself? The answer begins with a single brigade's annihilation. Maikop Street, New Year's Day, 1995. The 131st Maikop Brigade moves in line, 26 tanks and 120 BMP vehicles packed into the narrow avenue. The plan is simple: reach the city center, seize the presidential palace, break Chechen resistance in a single blow. Instead, the column rolls into a kill zone. Chechen fighters, hidden in basements and perched on rooftops, wait for the signal. At midnight, the lead tanks are hit from below. RPG rounds tear through tracks and fuel tanks, stopping the first vehicles cold. Seconds later, the last vehicles in the formation are struck from behind. The brigade is trapped, boxed in by burning armor and rubble. The geometry of the street leaves no room to maneuver. Tanks and BMP vehicles are jammed together, 5 or 6 meters apart, unable to turn or reverse. Russian crews try to return fire, but their turrets cannot elevate high enough to reach the attackers above. Anyone who bails out is cut down by machine gun fire from windows and alleys. Anyone who stays inside faces the fire. Within 2 days, 62 armored vehicles are abandoned in the pocket, 20 of the 26 tanks, 102 of the 120 BMP vehicles. The street is littered with twisted hulls, blackened by fuel fires. Radio traffic dissolves into chaos. The brigade commander, Colonel Ivan Savin, is killed when his BMP is struck by an RPG round. His last orders are lost in the confusion. By the end of January 2nd, the 131st Maikop Brigade ceases to exist as a fighting force. Survivors crawl out on foot or play dead among the wrecks. Out of the entire column, only a handful of vehicles make it back to Russian lines. The rest are left behind, silent evidence of a doctrine that never imagined the city itself could become a weapon. Russian tank crews in Grozny faced a mechanical reality for which no amount of courage could compensate. The T-72 and T-80, mainstays of the Russian armored force, were designed for open fields, not city streets. Their turrets could elevate only 13 to 14 degrees, enough for distant targets but useless against enemies firing from third-story windows or rooftops less than 200 meters away. The gunners' optics and targeting systems simply could not track threats above this angle. Chechen fighters understood this weakness long before the first Russian columns crossed the city limits. The armor itself told a similar story. The T-72's front boasted over 200 millimeters of steel, but the roof, just 40 to 60 millimeters thick, was a liability. Against an RPG-7 rocket, which could punch through 260 millimeters of steel at a 90-degree angle, this was no protection at all. The result was a tank that could shrug off a frontal hit in the countryside, but became a death trap when RPG-7 rockets rained down from above. Chechen hunter-killer teams operated in tight, disciplined cells of 5 or 6. Each group split across multiple floors of a building. 1 or 2 fighters in the basement, armed with RPG-7 rockets, waited for the column to pass. Their job was to hit the tracks or rear fuel tanks, immobilizing the tank and trapping it in place. Upstairs, on the roof or upper floors, the rest of the team prepared for the kill shot. In many cases, 3 or 4 RPG-7 rockets struck the same vehicle in quick succession. The thin steel gave way, ammunition cooked off, and the crew inside had seconds to escape if they could at all. The geometry of the ambush left Russian tankers with no good options. Their main guns could not elevate high enough to return fire. The machine guns mounted on the turret were just as limited. Even when crews tried to dismount and fight back, they faced automatic weapons and snipers positioned at every window and alley. The hunter teams coordinated their volleys, attacking from at least 5 or 6 angles at once. In these conditions, the average survival rate for a Russian tank crew in Grozny Street fighting dropped to around 30%. The rest were killed or wounded before they ever saw their attackers. On the ruined streets of Grozny, survival depended on whatever could be welded, bolted, or jury-rigged in the field. Russian crews, after watching tank after tank burn, started making their own fixes. The most common was cage armor, steel bars or rails welded around the turret and hull in a rough lattice. The idea was simple: force an incoming RPG-7 to detonate before reaching the tank's real armor. Spacing mattered. When the gap was right, about 30 centimeters, the warhead exploded harmlessly against the cage, sparing the crew inside. In practice, these improvised cages stopped maybe 1/3 of incoming rockets. But Chechen teams rarely fired just one. The first RPG might be stopped, the second might dent a rail, but the third or fourth usually found a gap or struck the same spot twice. For the tankers, it was a small edge in a losing fight. Another adaptation came from the anti-aircraft batteries. The ZSU-23-4 Shilka, built to shoot down jets, was pressed into street fighting. Its quad 23mm cannons could angle up to 85 degrees, sending a storm of shells into rooftop ambushes. At 3,400 rounds per minute, the Shilka could shred brick and concrete, driving Chechen RPG teams off the upper floors. In units where tanks, Shilkas, and infantry worked together, the odds improved. Combined arms drills gave tanks breathing room. Infantry cleared basements, Shilkas swept the rooftops, and tanks advanced behind this rolling shield. Where these drills were practiced, Russian losses dropped. But these lessons stayed local, spread by word of mouth, not by order from above. The real innovations came from the men under fire, not the generals watching maps. On December 25, 1999, the 245th Motor Rifle Regiment breached Grozny's southern sector. Russian armor advanced behind a wall of artillery and air strikes, moving at a crawl, 1 or 2 blocks each week. The order was clear: don't rush the city, reduce it. Every building ahead was shelled until nothing stood but concrete stumps. Once the barrage lifted, tanks and BMP vehicles rolled forward, picking their way through debris that used to be apartments and shops. Chechen defenders waited in the ruins, using the same hunter-killer tactics that had gutted Russian columns 5 years earlier. Basements and rooftops became firing platforms. RPG volleys struck from every angle, targeting tracks, fuel tanks, and turret tops. Some Russian vehicles sported welded cage armor, a field fix that sometimes stopped the first rocket. But the Chechens did not fire just once. The third or fourth hit usually found its mark, and the column stalled in the rubble. Crews of the 245th fought for every intersection. Each block cost vehicles, sometimes a handful, sometimes a dozen. The pace was relentless but slow. Russian units advanced only after the next cluster of buildings had been flattened. By the end of February 2000, over 200 armored vehicles were destroyed or crippled in Grozny. The city itself became unrecognizable, reduced to a grid of shattered blocks. The tactical trap never changed, only the scale of destruction did. Russian armor still paid the price, block by block, as the same ambush geometry played out beneath the ruins. Russian tanks still roll into cities, from Mariupol to Aleppo, while the doctrine behind them remains unchanged. The lesson Grozny taught is ignored, and the cost is paid in fire and rubble. Urban warfare punishes arrogance. History, when unlearned, always finds new streets to repeat itself on.